The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Bethany Taylor clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders, each painful step taking her farther from the nightmare she'd fled. Her bare feet bled onto the dusty Nevada trail, but the physical pain couldn't compare to the ache in her heart. Behind her, smoke still rose from what had once been her home, now nothing but ashes and bitter memories. It was 1873, and Bethany had just turned 21 last month. What should have been a milestone celebrated with cake and laughter had instead marked the beginning of her darkest days. Her stepfather's gambling debts had finally caught up to him, and rather than face the consequences, he'd offered something that wasn't his to give her hand in marriage to Silas Thornton, a man 30 years her senior with a reputation that made even the toughest cowboys lower their voices when speaking his name. She'd refused, of course, but Silas wasn't accustomed to hearing the word no. Tonight, he'd come to claim what he believed he was owed, with 3 of his men backing him. The confrontation had turned violent when her stepfather tried to change his mind. One gunshot later, the only parent she had known for the past decade lay dead on their cabin floor. In the chaos that followed, she'd managed to escape through the back window, barefoot and terrified, with only the simple cotton dress and shawl she'd been wearing. Silas had set fire to the cabin, erasing any evidence of his crime, and now she was running for her life with nothing but the clothes on her back. Bethany stumbled, her legs finally giving out from exhaustion. She'd been running for hours, guided only by the fading light and her desperate need to put distance between herself and Thornton's men. As darkness settled across the land, the temperature dropped rapidly. Desert nights were merciless, and without shelter, she wouldn't survive until morning. A coyote howled in the distance, and Bethany fought back tears. She had no plan, no destination, just the blind hope that somehow she'd find safety. Her mother had always told her that God watched over fools and children. At 21, she was no longer a child, but running into the wilderness without provisions certainly qualified her as a fool. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. Someone was approaching from the east, the direction she'd come from. Panicking, Bethany crawled behind a large boulder, ignoring the pain as sharp rocks cut into her palms and knees. She held her breath as the rider drew closer. The horse slowed to a walk, and Bethany could hear the creak of leather as the rider shifted in the saddle. Had Thornton's men tracked her already? She closed her eyes and pressed herself against the cool stone, praying to become invisible in the growing darkness. "Hello," a deep voice called out. "I know someone's out here. I can see your tracks in the dirt." Bethany remained silent, weighing her options. The voice didn't sound like any of Thornton's men, but that didn't mean this stranger would be any kinder. "I'm not looking for trouble," the voice continued, "but these parts ain't safe for someone on foot after dark. Coyotes are the least of your worries." Against her better judgment, Bethany peered around the edge of the boulder. The moonlight revealed a tall figure on horseback, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He held no weapon that she could see, but his broad shoulders suggested he wouldn't need one to overpower her if he chose. "Are you hurt?" he asked, seeming to look directly at her hiding spot. Bethany considered running but knew she wouldn't get far. Instead, she gathered what little courage remained and stepped out from behind the boulder, keeping her distance. "I'm not hurt," she lied, ignoring the blood on her feet and the bruise forming where Thornton had grabbed her arm. "I'm just traveling." The man's laugh was warm and without mockery. "Traveling mighty light, I'd say." He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life on horseback. Now that he stood on the ground, Bethany could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps late 20s, with a face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in its rugged way. "The name's Gideon Chase," he said, keeping his distance as if sensing her fear. "I've got a camp set up about a mile from here. Food, water, and a fire. You're welcome to join me for the night. No strings attached." Bethany hesitated. Every instinct told her to be wary of strange men offering help, especially after what she'd just escaped. Yet the night was getting colder, and her options were dwindling by the minute. "How do I know you're not worse than what I'm running from?" she asked, her voice stronger than she felt. Gideon removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "You don't," he said honestly, "but I give you my word as a man that I mean you no harm. I was raised to help those in need, not take advantage." Something in his direct gaze made Bethany want to believe him. Or perhaps it was just desperation. Either way, she had little choice. "Bethany," she offered, withholding her last name out of caution. "My name is Bethany." "Well, Miss Bethany," Gideon said, placing his hat back on his head, "would you prefer to walk, or would you allow me to offer you a ride on Maverick here?" He patted his horse's neck. After a moment's hesitation, Bethany approached. "I've never ridden before." "Then today's your lucky day," Gideon replied, his smile genuine in the moonlight. He helped her onto the saddle with respectful hands, then led the horse by the reins, walking alongside rather than mounting behind her, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed. True to his word, Gideon's camp was just under a mile away, nestled in a small canyon that provided shelter from the wind. A fire burned low, and the smell of coffee and beans made Bethany's stomach growl loudly enough for them both to hear. "When's the last time you ate?" Gideon asked as he helped her down from the horse. "Yesterday morning," Bethany admitted, embarrassed by her body's betrayal. Gideon nodded without prying further. "Well, I've got plenty for both of us." As they approached the fire, Bethany took stock of his camp. A bedroll, saddlebags, a small pot of beans simmering at the edge of the flames, and a coffee pot. Simple, but to her eyes it was a feast. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a flat rock near the fire. "Let me take a look at those feet while the food warms up." Before she could protest, Gideon retrieved a canteen and a clean bandana from his saddlebag. He knelt before her and gently lifted one foot, then the other, cleaning away the dirt and blood with careful movements. "These need tending properly, but this will have to do for now," he said, wrapping the bandana around the worst of the cuts. "Tomorrow we can get you to Yarrington. There's a doctor there who won't ask too many questions." "Yarrington?" Bethany asked. She'd heard of the town but had never been. "Small place, about a day's ride from here. Not much to look at, but the people are decent enough." Gideon handed her a tin cup of coffee and a plate of beans. "Eat slowly. Your stomach won't be used to it if you've gone without for a while." Bethany took small bites, savoring each one as if it might be her last. When she'd finished, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Chase?" Gideon stared into the fire for a long moment. "Because 6 years ago someone helped me when I needed it most. Figured it was time to pass that kindness along." He looked up at her. "And it's just Gideon. Mr. Chase was my father, and he wasn't a man I care to be compared to." Bethany nodded, understanding there was a story there he wasn't ready to share. "Well, thank you, Gideon. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." "No need for thanks," he replied. "Now you should get some rest. Take my bedroll, I'll keep watch." "But where will you sleep?" Bethany protested. Gideon smiled. "I've slept under the stars plenty of times. One more night won't hurt me none." Bethany wanted to argue, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking her. She settled into his bedroll, the warmth of the fire and the full meal making her eyelids heavy. "Gideon," she murmured, already half asleep. "What if they're following me?" His voice came to her through the growing fog of sleep, strong and reassuring. Then they'll have to go through me to get to you. Sleep now. You're safe." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Bethany believed it. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong. Bethany woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was and how she'd gotten there. The events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, scanning her surroundings. Gideon was already awake, tending to his horse a few yards away. The fire had been rebuilt, and fresh coffee bubbled in the pot. He must have heard her stir because he turned, offering a nod of acknowledgement. "Morning," he said, approaching with a tin cup. "Coffee," Bethany accepted gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm metal. "Thank you. How are those feet feeling?" Gideon asked, crouching down to examine his makeshift bandages from the night before. Bethany wiggled her toes experimentally, wincing at the pain. "They hurt, but I'll manage. We'll get those taken care of in town," Gideon promised. He hesitated, then added, "I don't mean to pry, but it might help if I knew what kind of trouble you're running from, or who." Bethany took a deep breath. She owed him the truth after his kindness, but speaking it aloud made her vulnerability real in a way she wasn't sure she was ready to face. "My stepfather made a deal with a man named Silas Thornton," she began, voice steady despite the fear the name still evoked. "He gambled away everything we had, and when there was nothing left, he offered me as payment." Gideon's expression darkened. "Silas Thornton from Silver Springs." Bethany nodded, surprised. "You know him?" "Know of him," Gideon corrected, his jaw tightening. "He's got a reputation across 3 territories, none of it good. He runs most of the gambling halls between here and California, along with other enterprises best not mentioned in polite company." "My stepfather tried to back out of the deal last night," Bethany continued, staring into her coffee. "Thornton shot him, then set our cabin on fire. I managed to escape, but I've got nothing left. No family, no possessions, not even a pair of shoes." She attempted a weak smile. "Just the clothes on my back." Gideon was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but determined. "Well, Miss Bethany, it seems you're in need of more than just medical attention. You need somewhere safe to stay, proper clothes, and a chance to start over." He stood, brushing dust from his worn denim pants. "As for possessions, don't you worry about that. I have enough for both of us." The simple statement, offered without expectation or pity, brought tears to Bethany's eyes for the first time since her escape. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed by the display. "I can't accept charity," she protested weakly. "Once I get to town, I'll find work." "I can sew, cook, clean. It's not charity," Gideon interrupted. "It's a temporary helping hand. We all need one from time to time." He paused, then added with a hint of humor, "Besides, I've been on the trail for 2 months. Having someone who can cook a decent meal would be payment enough." Bethany couldn't help but smile at that. "Well, when you put it that way, Mr. Gideon, I suppose I could cook you a proper meal once we reach civilization." "That's settled then," Gideon said, as if they'd concluded complex negotiations. "We should get moving. It'll take most of the day to reach Yarrington, and I'd rather not spend another night in the open if Thornton's men are searching." He offered his hand to help her up, and Bethany took it without hesitation. His calloused palm was warm against hers, strong but gentle. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. The moment ended when Gideon cleared his throat and released her hand. "Let me pack up camp. We'll be on our way within the hour." While Gideon prepared for their journey, Bethany washed her face in a small basin he'd provided. The cool water was a luxury she hadn't expected, and she savored it, trying to make herself as presentable as possible given the circumstances. "Here," Gideon said, approaching with a bundle of fabric. "Found these in my pack. They'll be too big, but they might help protect your feet until we can get you proper shoes. Bethany unfolded the offering to find a pair of thick wool socks. These are nice, she said, genuinely touched by the simple gift. My sister sent them last Christmas, Gideon explained. Said a man my age shouldn't be wearing darned socks when she could knit new ones. A fond smile crossed his face at the mention of his sister. You have family? Bethany asked, carefully pulling the oversized socks onto her injured feet. Gideon nodded, securing his bedroll behind the saddle. Abigail, my sister, and her husband run a small ranch outside of Yerington. That's where I'm headed. Been working cattle drives to save up enough to buy some land nearby. The image of this rugged cowboy receiving knitted socks from a caring sister softened something in Bethany's heart. She'd lost her own mother at 16, and her stepfather had never been one for familial warmth. The idea of having people who cared enough to worry about something as simple as the condition of your socks seemed like a dream from another life. They sound lovely, she said quietly. They are, Gideon agreed. Abigail's got a big heart and an even bigger opinion on how I should be living my life. He chuckled, shaking his head. Been trying to marry me off for years. The comment hung in the air between them, suddenly awkward. Gideon cleared his throat again, focusing intently on adjusting straps that didn't need adjusting. Anyway, he continued briskly, they'll be glad to help. Abigail's about your size. She can probably spare some clothes until we can get you situated. Bethany stood, testing the feel of the thick socks. They helped cushion her tender feet, though walking was still painful. Thank you. I promise I won't be a burden for long. Gideon's expression softened as he turned to face her. You're not a burden, Miss Bethany. You're someone who needs help, and I'm in a position to give it. Simple as that. There was something so straightforward about his kindness, so lacking in ulterior motive, that Bethany found herself believing him. In a world that had shown her little but harshness lately, Gideon Chase was an unexpected oasis of decency. Now, he said, patting Maverick's flank, shall we get you up on this horse? We've got ground to cover. This time, Gideon mounted behind her, his arms reaching around to hold the reins. The arrangement was intimate by necessity, and Bethany felt her cheeks warm at the proximity. She sat rigid at first, trying to maintain as much space between them as the saddle would allow. Relax, Gideon advised as they started moving. Riding's all about moving with the horse. Fight against it, and you'll be sore before midday. Gradually, Bethany allowed herself to settle into the rhythm of the horse's gait, her body unconsciously syncing with Gideon's as they traveled. The discomfort of their closeness gave way to a strange sense of security. His presence at her back was solid and reassuring, a shield between her and the dangers she'd fled. They rode in companionable silence for the first hour, the landscape slowly transforming as the sun climbed higher. The barren stretch where he'd found her gave way to scattered juniper and sage, the air fragrant with their scent. "How did you find me last night?" Bethany finally asked, breaking the quiet. "These seem like empty lands to me." "I was tracking a mountain lion that's been taking calves from ranches near Yerington," Gideon explained. "Lost the trail near sunset and was heading back when I saw smoke from your cabin. Went to investigate, thinking it might be a wildfire starting. By the time I got there, the place was nearly burned through, and I spotted riders heading north." "Thornton and his men," Bethany said softly. Gideon nodded, though she couldn't see it. "4 riders moving fast. I stayed clear of them, but I saw boot prints heading west, small prints that didn't match theirs. Figured someone had escaped and might need help." Bethany absorbed this information, realizing how fortunate she'd been. "So you followed my tracks in the dark." "I'm a fair tracker," Gideon said modestly, "and the full moon helped." "Well, I'm grateful for your skills," Bethany replied, "and that you chose to follow me instead of minding your own business." Gideon's chuckle rumbled against her back. "My sister would tell you I've never been good at minding my own business when someone else is in trouble." Around midday, they stopped to rest Maverick and eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack that Gideon had packed. They sat in the shade of a large boulder, watching hawks circle overhead in the clear blue sky. "Can I ask you something?" Bethany ventured after they'd eaten in silence for several minutes. Gideon nodded, his expression open. "You mentioned that someone helped you once. What happened?" The question seemed to catch him off guard, and for a moment Bethany thought she'd overstepped. But then Gideon leaned back against the rock, his gaze distant as if looking into the past. "I was 19, he began slowly. "My father was a mean drunk with a heavy hand. One night it got worse than usual. I fought back for the first time and I nearly killed him." The admission was stark, without embellishment. "I ran. Figured I'd be wanted for murder, so I kept to the back country, avoiding towns. Nearly starved to death before an old rancher found me collapsed on his property." Gideon paused, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "His name was Walter Buchanan. Instead of turning me in, he gave me food, a place to sleep, and work to do. Later, I found out my father hadn't died, just told everyone I'd run off after robbing him. Walter helped me clear my name, taught me ranching, and treated me like a son for 3 years until his heart gave out." Bethany's own heart ached for the young man he'd been, alone and frightened. "He sounds like a good man." "The best I've ever known," Gideon agreed. "Left me enough money to get started on my own, which is what I've been working toward." His daughter sold the ranch after he passed. She was married to a banker in Sacramento and had no interest in keeping it, but I always promised myself I'd have a place of my own one day. A place where things are done right. The vulnerability in his admission touched Bethany deeply. They'd both been shaped by loss and violence, yet here was Gideon still believing in kindness, still passing it forward. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. Gideon met her eyes, and for a breathless moment, Bethany felt something shift between them, a connection forming through shared pain and unexpected understanding. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Gideon was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Get behind the rock," he instructed, his voice low and urgent. "Don't come out until I call for you." Bethany didn't argue, scrambling to conceal herself as Gideon moved to intercept whoever was approaching. From her hiding place, she could see him standing casually by Maverick, his posture relaxed but alert, one hand resting near his weapon. 2 riders appeared over the rise, moving at a steady trot. Bethany's breath caught in her throat as she recognized one of them, a heavyset man with a distinctive red beard. He was one of Thornton's men, the one who'd held her stepfather's arms while Silas pulled the trigger. The riders slowed as they spotted Gideon. Even from a distance, Bethany could see the suspicion in their posture. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Gideon called out, his voice carrying clearly to where Bethany hid. "Fine day for riding." "Looking for someone," the red-bearded man replied without preamble. "Young woman, early 20s, brown hair." "Seen anyone matching that description?" Gideon shook his head. "Can't say that I have. Been tracking a mountain lion these past few days. Haven't crossed paths with anyone until now." The second rider, a thin man with a pockmarked face, leaned forward in his saddle. "You sure about that, Cowboy?" "The girl's a thief. Stole a considerable sum from our employer before setting fire to his property. There's a reward for information." Bethany bit her lip to keep from making a sound. The lie didn't surprise her. Thornton wouldn't admit to murder, but the idea that they were framing her for arson and theft was a cruel twist. "That's so," Gideon replied, sounding mildly interested. "What's the reward amount?" $50, Redbeard said. "Plus our employer's gratitude, which is worth more in these parts." Gideon gave a low whistle. "That's generous for a thief. Must have taken a fair amount." "She did," Pockmark agreed quickly. "Family heirloom too, gold locket with sentimental value." Bethany almost laughed at the absurdity. She'd never owned a piece of gold jewelry in her life, and Thornton wasn't the sentimental type. "Well," Gideon said, stretching casually, "if I see her, I'll be sure to let someone know. Where might I find your employer to claim this reward?" "Silas Thornton," Redbeard said. "He's got business in Silver Springs, but he'll be returning to his property near Carson City within the week. Anyone in town can point you his way." Gideon nodded. "I'll keep that in mind. Good hunting, gentlemen." The men hesitated, and for a terrifying moment, Bethany thought they might insist on searching the area. But after exchanging a glance, they turned their horses and continued on their way, kicking up dust as they disappeared over the next rise. Bethany counted to 100 before daring to breathe normally again. Gideon waited until the riders were well out of sight before signaling her to come out. "You were right about them following you," he said grimly. "And they've got a story all worked out to justify the hunt." Bethany emerged shakily from her hiding spot. "I recognized the one with the red beard. He was there when Thornton killed my stepfather." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the midday heat. "They're calling me a thief to cover up what they did." Gideon's expression hardened. "It's a smart play. Gets others looking for you while keeping their own hands clean." He reached out, hesitating briefly before placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "But it changes our plans. We can't risk taking you into Yarrington directly now. There might be others looking for you there." Panic fluttered in Bethany's chest. "What do we do?" "We'll circle around to my sister's ranch," Gideon decided. "It's a few miles outside of town. You'll be safer there while I go into Yarrington to see what's being said and get what supplies you need." The thought of being separated from Gideon, even briefly, filled Bethany with dread. In just one day, he'd become her lifeline, her only protection against Thornton's reach. Seeing her distress, Gideon's voice softened. "Abigail and her husband, Frank, are good people. They'll keep you safe until I return." Bethany nodded, trying to look braver than she felt. "All right. When do we leave?" "Now," Gideon said, already moving to prepare Maverick. "Those men were heading west, but they might circle back this way. Best if we're long gone by then." They mounted quickly and set off at a faster pace than before. Gideon kept them to rocky ground where possible, making their trail harder to follow, and took them through a winding canyon that added miles to their journey but provided cover from prying eyes. As the afternoon wore on, Bethany felt Gideon's arm tighten protectively around her waist whenever they navigated difficult terrain. The gesture, while practical, stirred something warm within her, a feeling so long absent she almost didn't recognize it. Safety. Connection. Perhaps even the first stirrings of something deeper. The sun was beginning its descent when they crested a hill, and Gideon reined Maverick to a stop. Below them stretched a small valley, green with early summer growth. A modest ranch house sat nestled against the base of the opposite hill, smoke rising cheerfully from its chimney. Several outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, and a small herd of cattle grazed in a nearby pasture. "Abigail's place," Gideon announced, obvious pride in his voice. "Not the biggest spread in Nevada, but the best run, if you ask me." The sight of the peaceful homestead brought a lump to Bethany's throat. It represented everything she'd lost: a home, security, belonging. And yet, as they began their descent toward it, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was not just an ending but a beginning as well. As they approached the ranch, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the setting sun. Even from a distance, Bethany could see the family resemblance, the same strong jawline and straight-backed posture that Gideon possessed. "Gideon Chase," the woman called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "You're a full week early and twice as dusty as I expected." Gideon's laugh rumbled against Bethany's back. "And you're as loud as ever, Abby," he called in return. They rode into the yard, where Abigail waited with hands on her hips. She was tall for a woman, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that matched her brother's in both color and shrewdness. Her gaze moved immediately to Bethany, curiosity evident in her expression. "Well now," she said as Gideon helped Bethany dismount, "this is an unexpected development." "Abigail, this is Miss Bethany," Gideon said formally. "She's in need of assistance. Bethany, this is my sister, Mrs. Abigail Wilson." Bethany attempted a curtsy, then winced as pain shot through her injured feet despite the borrowed socks. Abigail's eyebrows rose, but to Bethany's relief, no judgment crossed her face, only concern. "Those feet need tending," she observed matter-of-factly. "And you look like you could use a hot meal and a proper rest." She turned to her brother. "Trouble, the worst kind," Gideon confirmed grimly. "Silas Thornton." Abigail's expression darkened at the name. "I see. Well then, best get inside before anyone passing might spot our guest." She gestured toward the house. "Frank's in town picking up supplies, but he'll be back by supper." Gideon helped Bethany to the porch, supporting her weight when she stumbled. Abigail watched the interaction with keen interest, a knowing look passing briefly across her face before she schooled her features. The interior of the Wilson home was modest but comfortable, with sturdy handmade furniture and colorful quilts adding warmth to the practical space. A large cookstove dominated one wall of the main room, radiating pleasant heat. "Sit," Abigail instructed, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. "Let me see those feet." Bethany obeyed, embarrassed by her disheveled state in this clean, orderly home. "I'm sorry to impose," she began, but Abigail waved away the apology. "Any friend of my brother's is welcome here," she said firmly, kneeling to examine Bethany's feet. She carefully removed Gideon's socks, her touch gentle as she assessed the damage. "These need washing and proper dressing. And you, my dear, need a bath and fresh clothes." "I'll fetch water," Gideon offered, already heading for the door. When he was gone, Abigail looked up at Bethany, her expression softening. "Now, while my brother's out of earshot, why don't you tell me the full story?" "I've never known Gideon to bring a young woman to meet his family before, especially not one in such distress." Something in Abigail's direct manner reminded Bethany of her own mother, practical, no nonsense, but fundamentally kind. The realization brought tears to her eyes, and once they started, she couldn't stop them. Weeks of fear and days of terror poured out as she told Abigail everything: her stepfather's gambling, Thornton's unwanted advances, the murder, the fire, her desperate escape, and Gideon's timely intervention. By the time she finished, Abigail had moved to sit beside her, one arm wrapped supportively around Bethany's shoulders. "You poor child," she murmured. "What a nightmare you've endured." She squeezed Bethany's hand. "But you're safe now. Thornton has no friends in this household, I assure you." "His men are searching for me," Bethany said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "They're telling people I'm a thief." "Let them talk," Abigail replied firmly. "Words can't hurt you here." "And Thornton knows better than to cross Frank. They had an altercation years ago that left Thornton with a permanent reminder not to trespass on our land." This new information piqued Bethany's curiosity, but before she could ask for details, Gideon returned with buckets of water. "Frank built us a proper bathhouse last year," Abigail told Bethany, standing to help her brother. "It's just off the kitchen. We'll have you soaking in hot water in no time." True to her word, within half an hour, Bethany found herself submerged in a copper tub, warm water easing the aches from her body. Abigail had provided a cake of lavender soap and left a clean nightgown and robe hanging nearby. "Take your time," she'd instructed. "When you're done, I'll dress those feet properly and find you something to wear. We're about the same size, though you're a bit more slender than I am." The simple kindness of clean water and soap brought fresh tears to Bethany's eyes. She scrubbed away the dirt and fear of the past days, washing her hair thoroughly and relishing the feeling of being clean again. By the time she emerged, wrapped in the borrowed robe with her damp hair combed neatly, Abigail had prepared a light meal and set out medical supplies. "Gideon's tending to Maverick," she explained, motioning for Bethany to sit. "Eat while I see to your feet." The food was simple but delicious: bread fresh from the oven, slices of cold ham, and stewed apples. Bethany ate slowly, savoring each bite while Abigail gently cleaned and bandaged her injured feet with practiced hands. "Were you a nurse during the war?" Bethany asked, noting the confident way Abigail worked. "For a time," Abigail confirmed. "Though mostly I tended the ranch while Frank and Gideon served. After, I helped at the doctor's office in Yerington when needed. On a ranch, medical skills come in handy more often than not." The sound of men's voices announced the arrival of Frank Wilson. He entered the kitchen with Gideon, a tall man with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard. "So this is our guest," he said, his voice deep and gentle. He offered Bethany a slight bow. "Frank Wilson, madam. Welcome to our home." "Thank you for having me," Bethany replied, touched by his courtly manners. "Gideon's explained the situation," Frank said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "You have our assurance that you're safe here for as long as you need to stay." The genuine welcome from these strangers overwhelmed Bethany. She looked from Frank to Abigail to Gideon, who stood slightly apart, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "I don't know how to thank you all," she said simply. "No thanks needed," Frank replied. "Any enemy of Silas Thornton is a friend of mine." He patted his left thigh, which Bethany now noticed was slightly stiff. "The man left me with a permanent limp after a disagreement over water rights. I left him with a broken jaw and a healthy respect for private property." Abigail rolled her eyes affectionately. "Frank still thinks that brawl was his finest moment." "It was," Frank and Gideon said in unison, then laughed. The easy camaraderie between the three of them warmed Bethany's heart. This was what family should be: supportive, teasing, unified in purpose. After the meal, they gathered around the table to discuss plans. Gideon would ride into Yerington the next day to gather information and purchase supplies for Bethany. "You'll need clothing, shoes, and personal items," he said practically. "Make a list of what you require, and I'll do my best to find it." "I have no money to repay you," Bethany reminded him, embarrassed. Gideon's expression softened. "I told you before, I have enough for both of us. Consider it an investment in your fresh start." "And while Gideon's in town," Abigail added, "you can rest those feet and help me with some light work around the house. Nothing strenuous," she added, seeing Bethany's eagerness to contribute. "Just enough to keep your mind occupied." That night, Bethany slept in a small but comfortable guest room. The bed was soft, the quilts warm, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly safe. As she drifted toward sleep, her thoughts returned to Gideon, his steady presence, his undemanding kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She had known him barely a day, yet he had risked his safety for hers without hesitation. Such men were rare in her experience. Her stepfather had taught her to be wary of male attention, to suspect ulterior motives behind every kind gesture. But Gideon seemed genuinely different, honorable in a way that reminded her of the heroes in the dime novels she'd sometimes borrowed from the general store. A foolish thought, perhaps. Yet as sleep claimed her, Bethany allowed herself to wonder if, somehow, this nightmare might lead to something unexpectedly beautiful. Morning brought sunshine streaming through curtained windows and the smell of coffee and bacon. Bethany dressed in clothes Abigail had left for her, a simple skirt and blouse that fit reasonably well, and made her way to the kitchen, her bandaged feet much less painful after a night's rest. She found Abigail at the stove and Gideon at the table, studying a crude map drawn on a piece of paper. Both looked up when she entered. "Good morning," Gideon said, his voice warm. "You look better." A slight flush colored his tan cheeks, and he quickly returned his attention to the map. Abigail shot her brother an amused glance before turning to Bethany. "How did you sleep, dear?" "Wonderfully," Bethany admitted, taking the seat Gideon pulled out for her. "I can't remember the last time I felt so rested." Breakfast was a hearty affair of bacon, eggs, and biscuits. Frank joined them, discussing ranch matters with Gideon while Abigail explained to Bethany the rhythm of life on their small spread. "We run about 60 head of cattle," she said. "Not a large operation, but it's enough to keep us comfortable. Frank handles most of the ranching with help from Miguel, our hired hand. I manage the house, the garden, and the chickens." "It sounds wonderful," Bethany said sincerely. "It's a good life," Abigail agreed. "Hard work but satisfying." She glanced at her brother. "Gideon's been saving to start his own place nearby. He's got his eye on the old Peterson property that borders our northern pasture." Gideon looked slightly embarrassed by his sister's disclosure. "If the price comes down a bit more," he qualified. "Peterson's widow is asking more than it's worth right now." "She'll come around," Frank said confidently. "That land's been sitting empty for 2 years. Another winter with taxes due and she'll be ready to deal." After breakfast, Gideon prepared to ride into town. Bethany had written a short list of necessities, feeling guilty about each item despite his insistence that she include everything she needed. "Is there anything special you'd like?" he asked as he folded the list and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Something to lift your spirits." The thoughtful question caught Bethany by surprise. No one had asked about her preferences in so long that she struggled to think of an answer. "I've always loved books," she admitted finally. "But that's an unnecessary luxury." "What kind of books?" Gideon interrupted, ignoring her protest. Bethany hesitated, then answered honestly. "Stories, adventures, romances sometimes, though my stepfather said they filled my head with foolish notions." Something flickered in Gideon's eyes, anger perhaps, at the mention of her stepfather's dismissiveness. "I'll see what I can find," he promised. They walked together to the yard, where Maverick waited saddled and ready. Abigail and Frank had tactfully remained inside, giving them a moment of privacy. "Be careful," Bethany said, suddenly anxious about his journey into a town where Thornton's men might be watching. "If anyone recognizes you from yesterday." "I know how to keep a low profile," Gideon assured her, "and I won't be alone. Frank's coming with me. We'll say we're stocking up for a cattle drive." He adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the morning sun. "I should be back by evening." "Try not to worry." On impulse, Bethany reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you, Gideon, for everything." He covered her hand with his, the brief contact sending warmth up her arm. "You're welcome, Bethany." With that, he mounted and rode out, Frank joining him at the edge of the property. Bethany watched until they disappeared from view, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her: gratitude, worry, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. Abigail appeared beside her, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "My brother's a good man," she said casually. "The best I know, though I'd never tell him so. His head's big enough as it is." Bethany blushed, wondering how transparent her feelings must be. "He saved my life," she said simply. "Yes," Abigail agreed, linking her arm through Bethany's to guide her back to the house. "And I have a feeling you might be saving his, though he doesn't know it yet." Before Bethany could ask what she meant, Abigail changed the subject. "Now, let's see about finding you something to do that won't strain those feet. Can you sew?" The day passed pleasantly in domestic tasks. Bethany helped Abigail mend clothing, knead bread dough, and shell peas from the garden. The routine work was comforting, a return to normalcy after days of terror and uncertainty. As they worked, Abigail shared stories of growing up with Gideon, painting a picture of a serious, protective boy who had grown into a man with the same qualities. "He was always bringing home strays," she recalled fondly. "Injured birds, abandoned kittens if it was hurt or lost, Gideon would find it. Our mother used to say he had a heart too big for his own good." "Your parents," Bethany began hesitantly, "are they still?" "Mother passed when I was 16, Abigail answered, her voice softening with old grief. "Consumption. Father followed 5 years later his heart, the doctor said, though I think it was more that he'd lost his will to live after she was gone. They loved each other fiercely." "I'm sorry," Bethany said sincerely. Abigail nodded acknowledgement. "It was hard, especially on Gideon. He was only 14 when Mother died, 20 when Father followed. He took it upon himself to ensure I was provided for, worked himself to the bone until Frank and I married." She smiled at the memory. "Even then, he checked on us constantly until he was convinced Frank could care for me properly." "He's very protective of you," Bethany observed. "Of everyone he cares about," Abigail corrected, giving Bethany a meaningful look. "Which now includes you, whether you realize it or not." The statement sent a flutter through Bethany's chest. "He barely knows me." "Time doesn't always factor into such things," Abigail replied cryptically. "Sometimes the heart recognizes what it wants before the head has caught up." Before Bethany could formulate a response to this startling observation, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Abigail moved to the window, her body tensing as she peered out. "It's not Gideon or Frank," she said, her voice suddenly all business. "Two riders I don't recognize." She turned to Bethany, her expression grave. "Go to the root cellar. There's a small room behind the potato bins. Frank built it during the war when deserters were causing trouble. Don't come out until one of us calls for you." Bethany's heart pounded as she followed Abigail's instructions, slipping through the kitchen and down the narrow stairs to the cool, earthen cellar beneath the house. True to Abigail's word, a cleverly disguised door behind the potato storage led to a small chamber, just large enough to crouch in comfortably. "Whatever you hear, stay quiet," Abigail whispered, squeezing Bethany's hand before closing the hidden door. From her hiding place, Bethany could hear muffled voices as Abigail returned upstairs to meet the visitors. The floorboards creaked overhead, footsteps moving across the main room. She strained to make out words, catching only fragments of conversation. "Looking for a young woman. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Reward for information. Wish I could help you gentlemen." The voices grew louder, suggesting the men had entered the house. Bethany held her breath, pressing herself against the earthen wall of her hiding place. "Mind if we look around?" A gruff voice, vaguely familiar. "I'm afraid I do mind." Abigail's voice, firm and unwavering. "My husband doesn't take kindly to strangers searching our home in his absence." "Your husband being Frank Wilson." A second voice, calculating. "The same," Abigail replied coolly. "I expect him back any moment. He and my brother rode to town for supplies. Your brother, the first voice again, sharper now. Gideon Chase, Abigail said, a note of pride entering her voice. Perhaps you know him. A pause then. Can't say that I do, madam. But we'll be on our way before your menfolk return. No need to trouble them with our business. Footsteps retreated, followed by the sound of the front door closing. Bethany remained motionless, afraid to trust that the danger had passed. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before she heard the cellar door open and Abigail's voice call softly, "Bethany, you can come out now. They're gone." Emerging from the hidden room, Bethany found Abigail waiting with a lantern, her face pale but composed. Was it them? Bethany asked, though she already knew the answer. Abigail nodded grimly. Thornton's men. One with a red beard, the other thin with a scarred face. They're offering $100 now for information about you. Seems the price has doubled since yesterday. Did they believe you? I don't think so, Abigail admitted. But they didn't want to risk confronting Frank and Gideon. That gives us time at least. They returned upstairs, where Abigail immediately went to a cabinet and removed a shotgun, checking that it was loaded before placing it within easy reach. They'll be back, she said matter-of-factly, probably with reinforcements. We need to get word to Frank and Gideon. I've put you all in danger, Bethany said, guilt washing over her. I should leave? Absolutely not, Abigail interrupted firmly. Your family now, and family stands together. Besides, she added with a grim smile, I've been wanting to give Silas Thornton a piece of my mind for years. This might be my opportunity. Despite the gravity of the situation, Bethany found herself smiling at Abigail's fierce loyalty. Your brother mentioned you have a strong opinion on most things. Gideon thinks I meddle, Abigail replied with a sniff. I prefer to think of it as taking an active interest in the well-being of those I care about. The sound of horses approaching set them both on edge again, but this time Abigail's quick check at the window brought relief to her face. It's them, she confirmed, setting aside the shotgun. Gideon and Frank entered laden with packages, their jovial mood evaporating instantly when they saw the women's expressions. What happened? Gideon demanded, dropping his burdens to cross to Bethany, his eyes scanning her for signs of harm. Thornton's men were here, Abigail explained succinctly. 2 of them. They left peacefully enough when I mentioned you both would be returning soon, but I don't expect that courtesy to last. Frank's face darkened with anger. Did they threaten you? Not directly, Abigail assured him. But they're offering $100 for information about Bethany now. They'll be back, and they won't be alone. Gideon's jaw tightened as he turned to Bethany. Are you all right? The genuine concern in his voice touched her deeply. I'm fine, she assured him. Abigail hid me in the root cellar. They never knew I was here. Relief flashed across his features before determination set in. We need to move you somewhere safer, he decided. They know to look for you here now. Where? Frank asked practically. If Thornton's offering that kind of reward, half the territory will be watching for her. A tense silence fell as they considered their limited options. Finally, Gideon spoke, his voice resolute. The Peterson place, he said. It's abandoned, but the cabin's still sound. Remote enough that casual visitors are unlikely, but close enough that we can get supplies there easily. It's also property you've shown interest in, Abigail pointed out. If anyone connects you to Bethany, that might be the first place they look. Then we'll make sure no one connects us, Gideon countered. Frank and I will go to the saloon tonight, make it known we're heading south for a cattle drive. Meanwhile, I'll take Bethany to the Peterson place after dark. Frank nodded slowly, considering the plan. It could work. The cabin needs some attention, but it's livable. I have supplies, Gideon said, gesturing to the packages he'd brought. Enough to keep Bethany comfortable for a week or more, By then, Thornton might have given up the search or will have thought of a more permanent solution. Bethany listened to them, planning her safety with a mixture of gratitude and discomfort. These people had known her barely a day, yet they were risking their livelihoods, possibly their lives, to protect her. "I can't let you do this," she protested. "Thornton is dangerous." "If he discovers you've helped me, let him discover it," Gideon interrupted, his voice hard. "I'm not afraid of Silas Thornton or his hired guns." "You should be," Bethany insisted. "He killed my stepfather without hesitation. He burned our home to hide the evidence. He's not a man who leaves witnesses." "Neither am I a man who abandons those in need," Gideon replied firmly. "Especially not someone." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Someone I've given my word to protect." Something in his hesitation made Bethany wonder what he'd originally intended to say. Before she could dwell on it, Frank clapped his hands decisively. "It's settled then. Gideon will take Bethany to the Peterson place tonight. Abigail and I will create the impression that life continues as normal here, while spreading word of our non-existent cattle drive south." As the men set about preparing for their roles in the deception, Abigail pulled Bethany aside. "He bought everything on your list," she said, indicating the packages Gideon had brought. "And more." She pointed to a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, that one he was particularly careful with. Curious, Bethany unwrapped the package to find 3 books inside a volume of poetry by Tennyson, a copy of Little Women that looked nearly new, and a well-worn edition of Jane Eyre. The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to her eyes. How had he known exactly what would please her? She'd mentioned loving books, but nothing specific. He asked the bookseller what a young woman of education and good taste might enjoy, Abigail explained, correctly interpreting Bethany's wonder. Then he added Jane Eyre himself said he'd read it during the war and thought it might resonate with you. The idea of Gideon, this rugged cowboy, reading and appreciating Charlotte Bronte's tale of a plain, determined woman finding love against all odds. Bethany clutched the books to her chest, overwhelmed by a feeling she could no longer deny. In just 2 days, she had begun to fall in love with Gideon Chase. The realization should have frightened her. She'd sworn after escaping Thornton that she would never again be vulnerable to a man's power. Yet with Gideon, vulnerability felt like strength, not weakness. He had seen her at her most desperate and offered help without demanding anything in return. "He's never brought a gift to a woman before," Abigail said quietly, watching Bethany's face. "Not even his lady friends in town." "Lady friends," Bethany repeated, a note of unexpected jealousy coloring her voice. Abigail laughed softly. "A poor choice of words, perhaps. Gideon's been alone a long time. There have been women who have shown interest. The widow Johnson has been practically throwing her daughter at him for years, but he's never reciprocated." The admission should have reassured Bethany, yet it only emphasized how little she knew about the man who had so quickly become essential to her safety and happiness. "I've known him 2 days," she whispered, more to herself than to Abigail. "How can I feel this way about someone I've just met?" Abigail's expression softened with understanding. "Sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the head has caught up," she repeated her earlier words. "My Frank proposed 3 days after we met. When it's right, it's right." That evening, after a hearty meal that felt suspiciously like a farewell dinner, Gideon and Frank rode into town while Abigail helped Bethany prepare for her relocation. They packed food, clothing, and the few toiletries Gideon had purchased, along with a small medical kit for her still healing feet. "The Peterson place isn't luxurious," Abigail warned as she folded linens into a bundle, "but it's sturdy and private. Old man Peterson built it to last." "I'm grateful for any shelter," Bethany assured her. "After thinking I might sleep in the open desert for the rest of my life, a cabin sounds like a palace." Abigail paused in her packing. "Gideon told me how he found you. You must have been terrified." "I was," Bethany admitted. "But I was more afraid of what waited if I stayed." "You're brave," Abigail said simply. "Braver than many men I've known. Gideon sees that in you, you know. It's one of the things he admires." Before Bethany could ask what else Gideon might have said about her, they heard horses approaching. Frank and Gideon had returned, their mission in town apparently complete. "Word spread that we're leaving at dawn for a 2-month cattle drive," Frank reported as they entered. "Made sure Thornton's men heard it directly from us. And I let it slip that Bethany had continued west after declining our offer of help," Gideon added. "Said she was headed for California with a family that passed through yesterday." "Will they believe it?" Bethany asked anxiously. "They appeared to," Gideon replied, though his expression remained guarded. "But I don't trust Thornton to give up so easily. We should move you to the Peterson place now, while there's still enough moonlight to see by." Leaving the Wilson ranch was harder than Bethany expected. In just one day, Abigail had become like the sister she'd never had, and the warmth of their home had been a balm to her wounded spirit. As Abigail embraced her at the door, Bethany struggled not to cry. "This isn't goodbye," Abigail assured her, "just a temporary separation. We'll visit when it's safe, and eventually, you'll be back here properly as family." The words, laden with meaning, made Bethany glance at Gideon, who was busy securing their supplies to Maverick's saddle. Did he share his sister's apparent conviction that Bethany's place was with them permanently? The journey to the Peterson property took just over an hour, following rarely used trails through dense pine forests that blocked the moonlight. Gideon led Maverick carefully, one arm supporting Bethany as they navigated the difficult terrain. "Not much farther," he assured her as they emerged from the trees into a small clearing. "The cabin's just over that rise." When they crested the hill, Bethany saw a modest log cabin nestled against a backdrop of tall pines. It was larger than she expected, not just a one-room shelter, but a proper small home with what appeared to be at least 2 rooms and a covered porch. "It's lovely," she said sincerely as they approached. Gideon smiled, clearly pleased by her approval. "Peterson built it for his bride when they came west in '58. She was a Boston lady, not accustomed to frontier life, so he tried to make it as comfortable as possible for her." "What happened to them?" Bethany asked, noting the absence of personal touches that would indicate recent habitation. "She died in childbirth their 2nd year here," Gideon replied sadly. "The baby, too. Peterson stayed on alone until 2 years ago when his heart gave out. His widow, his second wife from a later marriage, lives in San Francisco. She's been trying to sell the property since his death, but hasn't found a buyer willing to meet her price." The tragic history of the place might have cast a pall over Bethany's spirits, but instead, she found herself imagining how it must have looked when new, built with love by a man determined to make his wife happy in a harsh land. Not unlike what Gideon was doing for her now, though under very different circumstances. Inside, the cabin proved to be clean and well-maintained, if dusty from disuse. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A door led to what Bethany presumed was a bedroom, while a ladder indicated a loft space above. "It's perfect," she breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Gideon busied himself lighting the lamps he'd brought, illuminating the space with a warm glow. "It needs work," he said modestly, "but it's solid. No leaks, even after 2 winters unoccupied." While Bethany explored, Gideon built a fire in the fireplace and began unpacking their supplies. The domestic scene, Gideon arranging food on shelves, Bethany examining the craftsmanship of the handmade furniture, felt strangely comfortable, as if they'd done this together 100 times before. "I should go," Gideon said reluctantly when everything was arranged to his satisfaction. "Frank's expecting me back before dawn so we can make a show of leaving for our supposed cattle drive." Reality crashed back in with his words. This wasn't their home, it was her hiding place. And Gideon wasn't staying, he couldn't, not if their ruse was to be believed. "How long will you be gone?" Bethany asked, unable to keep the dismay from her voice. "A week, maybe less," Gideon answered, moving to stand before her. "Frank and I will ride south far enough to be seen leaving the area, then circle back after a few days. I'll come check on you as soon as it's safe." A week alone in this remote cabin suddenly seemed like an eternity. "What if Thornton's men find me before then?" "They won't," Gideon assured her, his voice confident. "No one knows about this place except Frank, Abigail, and me, and I've taken precautions." He pointed to a shotgun propped beside the door that she hadn't noticed before. "Do you know how to use one of these?" Bethany nodded. Her stepfather had taught her the basics of shooting years ago, though she'd never had cause to use the skill. "Good. It's loaded, but there's extra ammunition in the drawer by the bed." Gideon's expression was serious now. "I don't expect trouble, but I want you prepared for anything." The concern in his eyes touched Bethany deeply. He was leaving nothing to chance when it came to her safety. "I'll be fine," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I've survived worse than a week of solitude." Gideon's gaze softened as he looked at her. "Yes, you have. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Bethany." The compliment warmed her from within, chasing away some of her apprehension about the separation ahead. "I got you something else," Gideon said, reaching into his pocket. "Meant to give it to you earlier, but with everything happening." He extended his hand, revealing a small paper-wrapped package. Bethany accepted it curiously, unwrapping it to find a delicate silver chain with a small pendant, a star, simply crafted but beautiful. "It's lovely," she whispered, genuinely touched. "It was my mother's," Gideon explained, a hint of shyness in his voice. "She always said stars guide us home when we're lost. Thought you might like a reminder that no matter how far apart we are, we're under the same stars." The significance of the gift, a family heirloom, something that had belonged to a woman he'd loved and lost, was not lost on Bethany. This was no casual gesture of friendship or duty. "I'll treasure it," she promised, clutching the necklace tightly. "And I'll look for you in a week's time." Gideon nodded, clearly reluctant to leave but knowing he must. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "Bethany," he said, turning back to her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I want you to know." Whatever he intended to say was lost as a sound outside caught his attention, the unmistakable crack of a twig breaking under someone's weight. In an instant, Gideon's demeanor changed, all softness vanishing as he moved swiftly to extinguish the lamps. "Someone's out there," he whispered, drawing his revolver. "Get behind the fireplace wall." Heart pounding, Bethany did as instructed, pressing herself against the rough stone chimney where she was hidden from view of the windows. Gideon moved silently to peer through a gap in the curtains, his body tense and alert. "3 riders," he reported in a bare whisper. "Armed. One's definitely Thornton's red-bearded man." "How did they find us?" Bethany whispered back, fear clawing at her throat. "Doesn't matter now," Gideon replied grimly. "What matters is getting you out of here safely." He crossed to where she stood, his expression resolute in the firelight. "There's a trapdoor under the bearskin rug in the bedroom. It leads to a root cellar with an exit that comes up behind the woodshed. When I engage them out front, you slip out that way and head into the forest. Follow the creek upstream. It'll lead you to a hunter's cabin about 2 miles north. Wait for me there." "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," Bethany protested. Gideon's expression softened for just a moment. "This isn't your fight." "It became my fight when Thornton killed my stepfather," Bethany countered. "And it became our fight when you chose to help me." A sound from the porch footsteps creaking on wood ended their whispered argument. Someone was approaching the door. "No time to argue," Gideon said, steering her toward the bedroom. "Go. Now." Bethany hesitated, then impulsively reached up and pressed her lips to his in a swift, desperate kiss. "Be careful," she breathed against his mouth. Surprise flashed across Gideon's face, followed by a determined nod. "Always am." As Bethany slipped into the bedroom, she heard a heavy knock at the front door. Gideon's voice, casual and unhurried, called out, "Who's there?" She didn't wait to hear the response. Moving quickly, she located the bearskin rug and pulled it aside to reveal the trapdoor Gideon had described. The hinges protested slightly as she lifted it, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. From the main room, she could hear Gideon speaking to whoever was at the door, his tone deliberately relaxed. "Evening, gentlemen. What brings you out this way so late?" A gruff voice responded, too low for Bethany to make out the words, but the menacing tone was clear enough. Heart racing, she descended the ladder into the root cellar, closing the trapdoor quietly behind her. The darkness was absolute, forcing her to feel her way forward with outstretched hands. The earthen floor was cool beneath her feet as she inched along, following the wall until she found what must be the exit Gideon had mentioned, a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Above, voices grew louder, angry now. A crash suggested furniture being overturned. Then, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Bethany froze, terror gripping her heart. Had Gideon been shot? Was he lying wounded or worse while she escaped? The thought of abandoning him was unbearable. Before she could reconsider her actions, Bethany was scrambling back to the ladder, driven by something stronger than fear, the sudden, crystal-clear realization that she loved him too much to leave him behind. Reaching the trapdoor, she pushed it open just enough to peer into the bedroom. It remained empty, though shouts and the sounds of struggle came clearly from the main room. Moving as quietly as possible, Bethany crossed to the door and cracked it open. The scene before her was chaos. Two men, neither the red-bearded one, were grappling with Gideon, who had managed to disarm one but was struggling against their combined weight. A third man, the one with the red beard, stood back, a smoking pistol in his hand. Blood darkened the sleeve of Gideon's shirt, but he was still fighting fiercely. Bethany's gaze fell on the shotgun by the front door, if she could reach it unnoticed. Moving slowly, she eased the bedroom door open wider. Redbeard's attention was fixed on the struggle before him, his back partially turned to her position. Now or never, she thought, and darted toward the shotgun. She almost made it. Her fingers had just closed around the weapon when Redbeard sensed movement and whirled to face her. "Well, well," he drawled, an ugly smile spreading across his face. "Look what we found, boys. Thornton's gonna be mighty pleased." Bethany raised the shotgun, aiming directly at his chest. "Tell your men to let him go," she demanded, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Redbeard laughed, clearly not believing she would shoot. "Put that down, girl, before you hurt yourself. Thornton wants you alive, but he didn't say nothing about undamaged. I said let him go." Bethany repeated, adjusting her grip on the shotgun. "I won't ask again." "Bethany, run." Gideon shouted, still struggling with his attackers. Redbeard's smile faltered slightly as he saw the determination in Bethany's eyes. "You ain't got the stomach to pull that trigger, girl." "My stepfather taught me to hunt when I was 12, Bethany informed him coldly. "I've killed deer, wild pigs, and once a mountain lion that was after our chickens. Don't test whether I can add men to that list." Something in her voice, or perhaps the unwavering aim of the shotgun, finally convinced Red Beard she was serious. "Ease up, boys," he called to his companions without taking his eyes off Bethany. "Let's talk this through civilized-like." The men loosened their hold on Gideon, who immediately broke free, landing a solid punch to one man's jaw that sent him crashing into a table. The other backed away, hands raised defensively. "Get over there with your friend," Gideon ordered, retrieving his revolver from where it had fallen. Blood still seeped from a wound on his upper arm, but he seemed otherwise unharmed. When all three intruders were lined up against the far wall, Gideon moved to stand beside Bethany, his presence steady and reassuring. "You should have run," he murmured, though there was a note of pride in his voice. "I couldn't leave you," she replied simply. Red Beard's eyes narrowed as he observed their exchange. "Well, ain't this sweet?" he sneered. "The cowboy and the runaway. Thornton's gonna enjoy dealing with both of you." "Thornton's not going to know about this," Gideon stated flatly. "Because you three are going to ride out of here and forget you ever saw either of us." A bark of laughter escaped Red Beard. "And why would we do that?" "Because if you don't," Gideon said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register, "I'll kill you. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but I will find you. And unlike Thornton, I don't leave loose ends." The quiet conviction in his tone sent a chill down Bethany's spine. This was a side of Gideon she hadn't seen before, hard, deadly, utterly capable of carrying out his threat. "You're bluffing," Red Beard said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Try me," Gideon invited softly. "I've got nothing to lose and everything to protect." The standoff stretched for several tense heartbeats before Red Beard finally nodded, recognizing he'd lost this round. "Fine," he conceded grudgingly. "We'll go, but Thornton won't stop looking." "Then he'll be looking in the wrong direction," Gideon replied, "because by this time tomorrow we'll be long gone from here." Under Gideon's watchful eye, the three men backed toward the door, clearly reluctant but seeing no alternative. As they reached the threshold, Red Beard paused, his gaze moving from Gideon to Bethany. "This ain't over," he warned. "For your sake it better be," Gideon responded evenly. "I won't be so merciful next time." After the men had mounted and ridden away, Gideon closed and barred the cabin door. Only then did he allow himself to slump against it, the adrenaline clearly fading to leave pain in its wake. "You're hurt," Bethany said, setting aside the shotgun to examine his wounded arm. "Let me help." "It's just a graze," Gideon assured her, though he didn't resist as she led him to a chair by the fire. Bethany worked swiftly, cutting away the bloody sleeve to reveal a deep furrow where the bullet had torn through flesh without lodging. Using supplies from the medical kit Abigail had packed, she cleaned and dressed the wound with gentle efficiency. "You've done this before," Gideon observed, watching her work. "My stepfather was prone to accidents," Bethany replied with a small shrug. "And doctors were expensive." Gideon's expression darkened at the implication, but he didn't press for details. When Bethany had finished bandaging his arm, he caught her hand in his. "Thank you," he said softly. "Not just for this," he nodded toward his bandaged arm, "but for coming back. Most people would have run." Bethany met his gaze steadily. "I'm not most people." "No," Gideon agreed, a smile touching his lips. "You certainly are not." In the quiet aftermath of danger, with the fire crackling and their hands still joined, something shifted between them. The attraction that had been building since he first found her in the desert crystallized into something deeper, more certain. "Bethany," Gideon began, his voice husky with emotion. "Before we were interrupted, I was trying to tell you something important." Her heart quickened as she waited for him to continue. I know it's fast, too fast, probably, he went on, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. We've known each other just days, but sometimes. He hesitated, seemingly searching for the right words. Sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the head has caught up, Bethany supplied quietly, repeating Abigail's wisdom. Surprise and pleasure flashed across Gideon's face. Yes, exactly that. He took a deep breath. I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you. It's like I've been waiting for you without knowing it. The simple, honest declaration brought tears to Bethany's eyes. I feel the same, she whispered. I thought I was running from something terrible, but maybe I was running toward something wonderful instead. Gideon's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Is it too soon to say I love you? Bethany's answering smile was equally radiant. Probably. Say it anyway. I love you, Bethany, he obliged, his voice steady with conviction. And I love you, Gideon Chase, she returned, the words feeling right in a way nothing else in her life ever had. This time when they kissed, there was no desperation, no fear driving them together, only the pure, sweet certainty of having found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were seeking. When they finally parted, Gideon rested his forehead against hers, his expression serious once more. They'll be back, he warned. With more men next time, we need to leave tonight. Bethany nodded, trusting his judgment implicitly. Where will we go? First to Frank and Abigail's to warn them, Gideon decided. Then north to Carson City. I have friends there, men who served with me during the war. They can help us get to California if needed. California, Bethany repeated, the word conjuring images of new beginnings far from Thornton's reach. Can we really start over there? We can start over anywhere, Gideon assured her. Together. The promise in that single word, together, filled Bethany with hope she hadn't dared feel since the night her world had burned to ashes. From those ashes, something precious had emerged, a love she hadn't been looking for, with a man whose kindness had saved her in more ways than one. They gathered their few possessions quickly, leaving most of what Gideon had purchased behind in favor of traveling light and fast. Within an hour, they were mounted on Maverick, heading back toward the Wilson Ranch under the canopy of stars that seemed to bless their journey. As promised, Gideon and Bethany stopped first at the Wilson Ranch, arriving just before dawn to find Frank already awake and Abigail brewing coffee in the kitchen. The news of Thornton's men tracking them to the Peterson place was met with grim determination rather than surprise. We knew Thornton wouldn't give up easily, Frank said, passing mugs of steaming coffee around the table. But finding you so quickly suggests he has eyes in Yarrington, someone who saw you arrive with Gideon and reported back. Gideon nodded, his expression dark. My thought exactly. Which means we need to move fast and trust very few people. Carson City is still your best option, Abigail agreed. Frank's cousin Timothy is sheriff there. He has no love for Thornton after what happened to his deputy last year. While the men discussed routes and timing, Abigail drew Bethany aside to help her change into more practical traveling clothes, a split riding skirt, sturdy blouse, and boots that fit better than Gideon's oversized socks. I wish we'd had more time together, Abigail said as she helped Bethany braid her hair. I always wanted a sister. Bethany smiled, touched by the sentiment. Perhaps we'll have that time someday when this is all over. You will, Abigail assured her with surprising certainty. Gideon's not one to give his heart easily, but once given, it's forever. He'll find a way for you to be together safely, even if it means taking on Thornton directly. That's what worries me, Bethany admitted. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to him because of me. Abigail squeezed her shoulder comfortingly. Gideon can take care of himself, and now he has even more reason to be careful. She smiled knowingly. I saw the way you two look at each other. You've admitted your feelings, haven't you?" Bethany blushed but nodded, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows what love looks like," Abigail replied, her expression softening. "It's how Frank and I still look at each other after 12 years of marriage." The thought of still gazing at Gideon with such devotion after more than a decade together filled Bethany with a warm glow. Despite the danger they faced, despite the uncertainty ahead, the future suddenly seemed bright with possibility. They left the Wilson Ranch as the first rays of sunlight touched the eastern horizon. Frank had supplied them with fresh horses Maverick for Gideon, and a gentle mare named Daisy for Bethany, along with enough provisions to reach Carson City without stopping in any towns along the way. "Follow the river north," Frank instructed as they prepared to depart. "Stay off the main trails. It'll add half a day to your journey, but you're less likely to encounter Thornton's men that way." Abigail hugged Bethany tightly before helping her mount. "Remember what I said," she whispered. "You're family now. Whatever happens, you always have a home with us." The journey to Carson City took 2 days of hard riding through rugged terrain. Gideon set a demanding pace, pushing their horses as much as he dared while still ensuring they would reach their destination safely. They camped in hidden valleys, built small fires that produced minimal smoke, and took turns keeping watch through the night. Despite the circumstances, Bethany found herself enjoying the journey. There was freedom in the wide open spaces, beauty in the untamed wilderness they traversed. And there was Gideon, whose quiet strength and unwavering focus on her safety made her feel protected without being smothered. In the evenings, as they sat beside their small campfire, they shared stories of their lives before meeting. Bethany told him about her mother, a school teacher who had loved poetry and instilled in her daughter a passion for learning. Gideon spoke of his time in the Union Army, the horrors he'd witnessed, and the friendships that had sustained him through the darkest days. "I was just 17 when I enlisted," he confessed on their second night, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "Lied about my age because I believed in the cause, thought war would be glorious." His laugh held no humor, lost that illusion quickly enough. "Is that when Walter Buchanan found you?" Bethany asked softly. "After the war," Gideon nodded. "I was a mess when I came home. The things I'd seen, the things I'd done. They followed me, nightmares every night. My father called me weak for it." His jaw tightened at the memory. "The night I finally fought back, he'd been drinking heavily, saying horrible things about my mother, how she'd be ashamed of what a coward her son had become." Bethany moved closer, resting her hand on his arm in silent support. "I just snapped," Gideon continued, his voice low. "All the rage I'd been holding back came pouring out. I beat him badly, thought I'd killed him. That's when I ran." He looked up at her, vulnerability evident in his eyes. "I'm not proud of that moment, Bethany. I lost control in a way that frightens me still." "You were protecting your mother's memory," Bethany said gently. "And yourself, after years of abuse. That's not the same as what men like Thornton do, hurting others for power or pleasure." Gideon covered her hand with his, gratitude in his gaze. "Walter said something similar when I finally told him the truth. Said there was a world of difference between a cornered animal fighting back and a predator attacking unprovoked." "He sounds very wise," Bethany observed. "He was," Gideon agreed, a fond smile softening his features. "Taught me how to be a man worth something, how to channel anger into purpose, how to stand up for what's right without becoming what I opposed." His expression grew thoughtful. "He would have liked you. Said a man's true measure was in how he treated those who couldn't fight back, and a woman's in how she fought despite the world telling her not to." Bethany smiled at that. "I wish I could have met him." "Me too," Gideon said softly, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. "But I see his influence every day in the man I try to be." He looked at her directly, his gaze intense in the firelight. "And I see it now in how determined I am to keep you safe, to give you the freedom to choose your own path without fear. And if my chosen path leads to you?" Bethany asked, her heart in her throat. Gideon's smile was slow and sure. "Then I'd be the luckiest man alive." They reached Carson City at midday on the third day after leaving the Wilson Ranch. The town was larger than Yerington, bustling with activity as the territorial capital. Gideon led them directly to the sheriff's office, where Frank's cousin Timothy Wilson greeted them with cautious welcome. Timothy was a tall, lean man with the same steady gaze as his cousin, though gray streaked his dark hair, and a jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir. He explained briefly, from his own encounter with Thornton's men the previous year. "Frank's letter arrived yesterday," Timothy said, ushering them into his private office at the back of the jailhouse. "Gave me time to make some arrangements." He outlined his plan with efficient precision. Bethany would stay with his sister's family on the outskirts of town, while Gideon sought assistance from his army contacts. Meanwhile, Timothy would send telegrams to law enforcement in neighboring territories, inquiring discreetly about any outstanding warrants against Thornton. "If we're lucky, we'll find something concrete enough to bring him in," Timothy explained. "The man's got a history of skirting the edge of the law, but he's careful about leaving evidence. Your testimony alone might not be enough without witnesses." "My stepfather is dead and our cabin burned to ashes," Bethany pointed out. "What kind of evidence could possibly remain?" Timothy's expression was grim but determined. "Sometimes it's not the crime itself that brings men like Thornton down, but the pattern of behavior surrounding it. If we can establish that he's been running gambling operations across territorial lines, that's a federal offense. Add intimidation, arson, and murder. Well, that builds a case even his money can't easily dismiss." Gideon nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's worth pursuing. But in the meantime, Bethany's safety is my priority. If Thornton tracks us here, he won't find her," Timothy assured him. "My sister's place is well outside town and only family knows of it. Martha was a nurse during the war. She knows how to be discreet." The arrangement was less than ideal. Bethany hated the thought of separation from Gideon, even temporarily, but she recognized the practicality of Timothy's plan. Staying together made them easier to track, and Gideon could move more freely alone. "It's just for a few days," Gideon promised as they prepared to part at Martha's small farmhouse that evening. "Time enough for me to contact my friends and for Timothy to gather information. Then we'll decide our next steps together." Bethany nodded, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "I understand. It's the sensible approach." Gideon's smile was gentle as he cupped her cheek in his palm. "Since when have matters of the heart been sensible?" The comment drew a laugh from Bethany despite her anxiety. "A fair point. But I can be patient if it means a future where we're not constantly looking over our shoulders." "That's the future I want for us," Gideon assured her, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "A place of our own, peace, a family someday if you want that." The image his words conjured, a home filled with love and children, Gideon at her side as they built a life together, made Bethany's heart swell with longing. "I want that very much," she whispered. Their farewell kiss was tender yet filled with promise, not an ending but a brief interruption in a story that was just beginning. As Gideon rode away, Bethany touched the star pendant at her throat, drawing comfort from the tangible connection to him it represented. Martha Wilson proved to be a gracious hostess and unexpectedly delightful company. A widow in her early 40s with grown children, She welcomed Bethany into her home with genuine warmth and an absence of prying questions. "Timothy told me enough," she explained over tea that first evening. "The details are yours to share or keep as you see fit." Her undemanding acceptance was balm to Bethany's spirit. After days of tension and uncertainty, the simple normalcy of sitting in a comfortable parlor, discussing books and current events rather than dangers and escape plans, felt like a luxury beyond measure. 2 days passed in relative tranquility. Bethany helped Martha with household tasks, read from her small but excellent library, and even assisted in the vegetable garden that supplied much of their food. The routine was soothing, though she found herself constantly watching the road for signs of Gideon's return. On the third day, just as they were preparing the midday meal, hoofbeats approached at speed. Bethany's heart leapt, thinking Gideon had returned early, but Martha's cautious movement toward the window suggested she shared Bethany's instinctive wariness. "It's Timothy," Martha reported with evident relief, "but he's riding hard." Timothy dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his expression grim as he strode to the door. Martha admitted him immediately, concern etched on her face. "What's happened?" she demanded without preamble. "Thornton's in Carson City," Timothy replied, removing his hat to reveal hair dampened with sweat. "Arrived this morning with 6 men. They're searching methodically, starting with the hotels and working outward." Fear coiled in Bethany's stomach. "How did he find us?" "I don't know," Timothy admitted. "But it doesn't matter now. We need to get you somewhere safer until Gideon returns." "Where is Gideon?" Bethany asked, trying to keep panic from her voice. "South of the city, meeting with former Army companions who now work as marshals," Timothy explained. "I've sent word, but it may be hours before he gets the message." Martha was already moving with efficient purpose, gathering supplies into a small satchel. "The Miller cabin," she suggested to her brother. "It's stocked and secure." Timothy nodded. "I was thinking the same." No one would think to look there. They worked quickly, preparing for Bethany's relocation while explaining the plan. The Miller cabin, originally built by Martha's late husband's family, sat hidden in a small canyon 10 miles west. Rarely used except during hunting season, it was nonetheless maintained and supplied for emergency use. "I can lead you there and return before Thornton's men think to look this far from town," Timothy assured Bethany. "Once Gideon receives my message, he'll know where to find you." The logic was sound, but something about the hastily arranged departure unsettled Bethany. "What if it's a trap?" she voiced her concern. "What if Thornton somehow knew I was here and is expecting us to run?" Timothy paused, considering her words with appropriate gravity. "It's possible," he acknowledged, "but staying here is riskier. Martha's connection to me is well known. It wouldn't take long for Thornton to make inquiries and discover this place." In the end, there was little choice. Within the hour, Bethany found herself on horseback again, following Timothy along narrow game trails that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. They rode in silence, both alert for any sign of pursuit or ambush. The Miller cabin proved to be even more secluded than Bethany had expected, a small, sturdy structure nestled against a rocky hillside, nearly invisible until they were upon it. A spring bubbled nearby, providing fresh water, and thick pine forests surrounded the clearing, offering both concealment and an early warning system against approach. "It's not luxurious," Timothy apologized as he helped her dismount, "but it's defendable and comfortable enough for a short stay." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly well appointed for its remote location. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a narrow bed occupied another, and basic cooking implements hung from hooks beside a small stove. Shelves held canned goods, flour, coffee, and other staples enough to sustain a person for weeks if necessary. Gideon should be here by tomorrow morning at the latest, Timothy assured her as he prepared to leave. But just in case, he placed a revolver on the table. This is loaded, and there's extra ammunition in that drawer. Do you know how to use it? Bethany nodded, thinking of the shotgun at the Peterson place. Yes. Timothy studied her for a moment, seeming to weigh her resolve. Whatever he saw in her face must have satisfied him, for he nodded briskly. Keep the door barred, he instructed. Don't open it for anyone but Gideon or me. If someone else approaches, there's a hiding place beneath the floorboards under the bed. Use it if necessary. With those final words of caution, Timothy departed, leaving Bethany alone with her thoughts and the loaded revolver. The isolation was more complete than at Martha's farm. No distant sounds of neighbors or passing wagons disturbed the stillness, only the whisper of wind through pine needles and the occasional call of a bird. Under different circumstances, Bethany might have found the solitude peaceful. Now, it only heightened her sense of vulnerability. As evening approached, she built a small fire in the stove, careful to keep it low so the smoke wouldn't be visible from a distance. The simple tasks of preparing a meal and making tea provided some distraction from her worries, but as darkness fell, her imagination conjured threats in every shadow. Sleep proved elusive despite her physical exhaustion. She lay on the narrow bed fully clothed, the revolver within easy reach, straining to hear any sound that might indicate approach, friendly or otherwise. When she did finally drift off near dawn, her dreams were fragmented and uneasy. The sound that woke her was real hoofbeats approaching at an unhurried pace. Bethany was instantly alert, the revolver in her hand before she was fully upright. Weak morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, enough to see by but not enough to identify whoever approached. Moving silently to the window, she peered cautiously through a gap in the rough curtain. A lone rider was approaching from the east, the direction of Carson City. The rising sun at the rider's back cast his features in shadow, but the broad-shouldered silhouette was achingly familiar. Relief flooded through Bethany as she recognized Gideon. She set the revolver aside and moved to unbar the door, eager to end their separation. She had just reached the latch when instinct made her pause. Something wasn't right. Gideon's posture in the saddle was too stiff, his approach too deliberate. And the horse, it wasn't the one he had been riding when they parted at Martha's. Doubt crept in, cooling her initial surge of relief. She returned to the window, studying the approaching figure more carefully. The rider was close enough now that she could make out more details. The hat was right, as was the general build, but something about the way he moved. A chill ran down Bethany's spine as realization struck. This wasn't Gideon. Moving swiftly but quietly, she gathered the revolver and her small satchel of belongings. Timothy's warning echoed in her mind. If someone else approaches, there's a hiding place beneath the floorboards under the bed. She had just managed to locate and open the trapdoor when a knock came at the cabin door, polite, unthreatening, but no less ominous for its civility. "Miss Taylor," a voice called, smooth, cultured, and entirely unfamiliar. "I know you're in there. I merely wish to talk." Bethany froze, her blood turning to ice. Not only had the stranger found her hiding place, but he knew her full name, something she hadn't shared with anyone except Gideon and the Wilsons. "Miss Taylor," the voice continued, "my name is Silas Thornton. I believe we have matters to discuss." The name she had come to fear above all others, spoken so casually, galvanized Bethany into action. She descended quickly into the space beneath the cabin, pulling the trapdoor closed above her. The hiding place was cramped, but not as dark as she expected. Thin streams of light penetrated through gaps in the floorboards. allowing her to see her immediate surroundings. To her surprise, the space was not merely a hole in the ground but a small cellar with what appeared to be a narrow tunnel extending from one side, perhaps an escape route similar to the one at the Peterson cabin. Above, she heard the cabin door splinter as Thornton or his men forced entry. Footsteps crossed the wooden floor directly over her head. "Search every corner," Thornton's voice commanded. "She can't have gone far." Bethany held her breath, pressing herself against the earthen wall of the cellar as boots thumped across the floorboards. The revolver was clutched tightly in her hand, though she prayed she wouldn't need to use it. "She's not here, Mr. Thornton," a voice reported after several minutes of searching. "But the stove's still warm. She hasn't been gone long." "Check outside," Thornton ordered. "She may have fled when she heard us approach." Footsteps receded, and for a moment Bethany dared to hope they would all leave to search the surrounding area. But one set of footsteps remained, pacing slowly across the cabin floor. "I know you're close, Miss Taylor," Thornton's voice came again, closer to her hiding place. "I've invested considerable time and resources in finding you. I don't intend to leave empty-handed." The footsteps stopped directly above the trapdoor. Bethany's heart hammered so loudly she was certain he must hear it through the floorboards. "Your stepfather made a deal," Thornton continued conversationally. "A debt of honor. Surely you were raised to understand the importance of honoring one's commitments." Anger flared within Bethany at the audacity of his words. A debt of honor. There was nothing honorable about selling a woman to pay gambling debts. Nothing honorable about murder and arson to cover one's tracks. The floorboards creaked as Thornton shifted his weight. "I'm a patient man, Miss Taylor, and I'm willing to be reasonable. Come with me voluntarily and I'll forget the inconvenience you've caused. Continue to resist, and I'm afraid matters will become unpleasant." Bethany's grip tightened on the revolver. She would die before she would go with this man, this monster who believed he could purchase her like cattle at auction. A sudden commotion outside drew Thornton's attention. Shouts, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. "Mr. Thornton," a voice called urgently. "Riders approaching." Armed, Thornton's footsteps moved rapidly away from the trapdoor. "How many?" he demanded. "At least 5, came the reply. "Coming fast from the east." A tense silence fell, broken only by the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats. Then Thornton's voice again, cold with fury. "Prepare to ride." "We're outnumbered here." More footsteps, the sound of men rushing to follow orders. Within minutes, Bethany heard horses galloping away from the cabin. Only when the sound had faded completely did she dare to breathe normally again. She remained in hiding, uncertain whether all of Thornton's men had truly departed, or if this was merely a ruse to draw her out. The approaching riders might be rescuers Gideon and his friends, or they might be more of Thornton's men, circling back to catch her unawares. The sound of the cabin door opening sent fresh fear coursing through her. Footsteps, a single set this time, moved cautiously across the floor. "Bethany," a voice she recognized instantly, rough with worry. "Bethany, are you here, Gideon?" she cried, pushing open the trapdoor and emerging from her hiding place. He was across the room in 3 long strides, gathering her into his arms with such force that it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Bethany clung to him, trembling with relief and residual fear. "I thought I'd lost you," Gideon murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "When I got Timothy's message and then found the cabin door broken open." "Thornton was here," Bethany confirmed, pulling back just enough to look up at his face. "He knew my name, Gideon, my full name. He knew exactly where to find me." Gideon's expression darkened. "Someone betrayed us, but who?" He shook his head, setting the question aside for the moment. "It doesn't matter right now. What matters is getting you somewhere truly safe. Where? Bethany asked, the word holding all her fears and uncertainty. If Thornton could find me here, he could find me anywhere. Not where we're going, Gideon assured her, his voice steady with conviction. My friends are outside 3 U.S. Marshals who served with me during the war. They've come with news and an offer of protection. He led her outside, where 4 men waited on horseback. Timothy was among them, his expression grim but relieved at the sight of Bethany unharmed. The other 3 were strangers to her, hard-looking men with the weathered faces of those who spent their lives outdoors and the watchful eyes of those accustomed to danger. Bethany, these are Marshals James Cooper, William Hayes, and Daniel Reid. Gideon introduced them. Gentlemen, Miss Bethany Taylor. The men nodded respectfully, though their attention remained largely focused on their surroundings, vigilant for any sign of Thornton's return. We should move, the one called Cooper suggested, his voice low and gravelly. This position is too exposed. Gideon agreed, helping Bethany mount a horse one of the marshals had brought for her. As they rode away from the cabin, he explained the plan that had formed in his absence. Cooper's been tracking Thornton for nearly a year, he told her. The man suspected of running an operation that crosses territorial lines, illegal gambling, prostitution, and worse. They need a witness to bring charges, someone willing to testify about his methods and crimes. Bethany understood immediately. They want me. Gideon nodded, his expression serious. It's dangerous, but it offers a permanent solution. Testify against Thornton, help put him behind bars, and we'll be free to live without looking over our shoulders. And until then, Bethany asked. Marshal protection, Gideon replied. At a location known only to the marshals and us. Thornton won't find you there, I give you my word. The promise, spoken with such conviction, eased some of Bethany's fear. She trusted Gideon implicitly, and if he believed this plan would work, she was willing to take the risk. I'll do it, she decided. I'll testify. Relief and pride mingled in Gideon's smile. I knew you would. You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Bethany Taylor. They rode hard through the day, following trails so faint they seemed invisible to Bethany's untrained eye. By sunset, they had crossed into California, where a small way station provided a secure place to rest for the night. It was there, as they sat together by a small fire after the others had retired, that Gideon revealed the rest of his plan. I've been thinking about our future, he began, his voice soft in the quiet night. About what happens after Thornton is dealt with. Bethany's heart quickened at the serious note in his voice. And what have you decided? Gideon took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. That I don't want to wait for someday to begin our life together. He reached into his pocket with his free hand, withdrawing a simple gold band. This was my mother's. I've carried it since she died, waiting for the right person to give it to. Tears welled in Bethany's eyes as he continued. I know it's fast. I know we're still in danger. But if these past days have taught me anything, it's that life is uncertain and precious. He held the ring between them, a symbol of his intentions. Bethany Taylor, will you marry me? Not someday, not when everything is perfect, but now as we are, with whatever the future holds. Joy bubbled up within her, bright and irrepressible despite the dangers that still surrounded them. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Gideon Chase, I will marry you. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains as he slipped the ring onto her finger. I love you, he said simply. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Together, Bethany agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that held all the hope and determination they shared. The testimony against Silas Thornton took place 3 months later in a crowded Sacramento courtroom. Bethany spoke clearly and without hesitation, recounting the events of that terrible night, her stepfather's murder, the burning of their cabin, her desperate escape, and Thornton's subsequent pursuit. She was not the only witness. Others had come forward once word spread of the federal case against Thornton, people who had suffered similar intimidation and violence at his hands, but had previously been too afraid to speak out. Together, their testimonies painted a damning picture of a man who considered himself above the law. Thornton maintained his innocence throughout, his smooth charm replaced by cold fury as the evidence mounted against him. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, with a sentence of 20 years in federal prison, his mask of civility finally cracked completely. His threats against Bethany and the other witnesses echoed through the courtroom as he was led away in chains. "He still has men who are loyal to him," Marshal Cooper warned as they left the courthouse. "You'll need to remain cautious for a time," but Bethany was no longer afraid. With Thornton imprisoned and his criminal organization dismantled, the shadow that had hung over her life for months had finally lifted. "We'll be careful," Gideon assured the marshal, "but we're not going to live in fear." They had married 2 weeks after his proposal, in a small ceremony at a church in Sacramento with the Marshalls and the Wilsons as their only guests. Frank had given Bethany away, and Abigail had wept happy tears throughout the service. Now, with the trial behind them, they were free to begin the life they had planned during those long months of waiting. "Where to now, Mrs. Chase?" Gideon asked as they left the courthouse, his arm protectively around her waist. Bethany looked up at her husband, love swelling in her heart. "Home," she replied simply. "Let's go home." Home was waiting for them 50 miles east of Sacramento, a small ranch Gideon had purchased with his savings, and a loan from a bank that valued his military service and reputation for hard work. The land was good, with a year-round creek and pastures sufficient for the modest herd of cattle they planned to raise. The house was not large, just 4 rooms and a kitchen, but to Bethany, it was a palace. Every nail had been driven with love, every board selected with care by Gideon's own hands. It was theirs, bought and paid for, a sanctuary they had created together. "What do you think?" Gideon asked as they stood on the porch, their first evening home after the trial. "Is it enough?" Bethany turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining with contentment. "It's everything," she assured him. "Everything I never dared to hope for," he smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It's just the beginning." And he was right. In the years that followed, their small ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Gideon's skill with cattle and Bethany's head for business proved a formidable combination. They added to their holdings gradually, building what became known as the Star Ranch, named for the silver pendant Bethany still wore faithfully around her neck. Children came first, a son they named Walter in honor of the man who had saved Gideon, then twin daughters who had their mother's spirit and their father's steady determination. Each birth was a miracle to Bethany, a reminder of how close she had come to a very different life. Abigail and Frank visited often, especially after selling their Nevada ranch and purchasing land that bordered the Star's western pastures. "To keep an eye on my little brother," Abigail claimed, though everyone knew it was the nieces and nephews she couldn't bear to be parted from. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Gideon surprised Bethany with an addition to their home, a library filled with books she'd mentioned loving over the years, complete with a comfortable window seat overlooking the mountains. "For the woman who escaped with only the clothes on her back," he said as he showed her the room, "and gave me a life richer than I ever imagined possible." Bethany smiled at the reference to their beginning, remembering his words on that desperate night when he'd found her in the desert. "I have enough for both of us." He had been right. though not in the way either of them had understood at the time. What they had built together, their home, their family, their love, was more than enough. It was everything. "Thank you for finding me," she said simply, taking his hand in hers. Gideon's smile was tender as he drew her close. "Thank you for waiting to be found." And in that moment, surrounded by books and bathed in the golden light of a California sunset, Bethany knew with absolute certainty that all the terror and loss that had preceded their meeting had been worth it. For it had led her here, to this man, this life, this love that had begun with a desperate escape, and a cowboy's simple promise, a promise he had kept beyond her wildest dreams.